I don't know if anybody's mentioned this in the MOOC yet. I'm hoping they probably have, and I'm going to go through it a bit. Have any of you seen the New Horizons report, which come out of the New Media Center in the States? Very interesting. I think personally a little bit US centric, and I'll explain why in a little while. One of the guy that writes it is a guy called Larry Pixel, or it's called Larry Pixel on Twitter. That's LARRYPIXEL, and if you're on Twitter, he's well worth following. I'll type that in actually. Thanks, Glenn, for sharing the URL link there. It's quite interesting. If you look at it, they talk about from this year about mobile. They talk about mobile being a trend in education technology in 1 to 2 years. I think in the UK, and speaking from a UK perspective, and looking at parts of Australia from my readings, it appears to be pretty well here now. Actually, I think it's beginning to come out all over. In the UK, we've seen an explosion in the use of mobile in terms of QR codes in advertising, but also in some areas of education. I've put some links to some other people that you may want to have a look at on Twitter later on around the area of mobile in primary and secondary. E-books is interesting for the people in the US who are online and the people that may be in Australia. I'm not sure, but in the UK, our curriculum isn't so textbook driven and standard set text as the States, so it's not been such a big driver as it has been in parts of the States when people are very keen to get larger quantities of e-books onto devices. It's worth saying, mind you, of course, that like anywhere in the world, I think there has been an absolute explosion since the Kindle and the iPad. And especially with the Kindle being so competitively priced in the UK, it's about £111. Carol's made an interesting point. It's quite interesting that there's quite a lot of freely available software, which I'm sure Carol can add to the wiki tomorrow or onto the discussion group, of kids making ebooks. And some of the stuff I'm going to show from Wolverhampton, talk about from Wolverhampton and go has been some early stuff there that's been going on for a long time, and that's great. And there's a huge ride also, not just in ebooks, but in primary age school blogging, which is becoming huge in the UK. I think Carol would probably agree with that. I think what's interesting is I don't pretend, I'm not a games-based learning specialist, and I don't pretend to be. I think it's becoming very interesting. I think if you chuck in mobile devices, so with context-aware and location-aware devices, a lot of gaming and historically orientated gaming becomes really quite compelling and quite exciting. I think augmented reality is going to be absolutely enormous in lots of different areas, and I'm going to show some stuff of that later on. Go back one, sorry, that's the slip. I could. Just doing it. If you haven't, this is being compiled by some of my colleagues in the HE community, and I think it's already been raised in the MOOC. They've been doing looking at the mobile and wireless technologies review, and that's going to come out as a more major report in the next year. But the initial stuff is up there, and there's a QR code through to that really. That's JISC are an organisation that primarily work with HE and further tertiary or vocational education, as you would say in parts of the US and parts of Europe. The project I've had a lot to do with in my previous role at Beck was evaluating the Wolverhampton Learning to Go project, which has been a project that's really trailblazed with a time when actually doing the kind of things is really quite hard. If you think 2003, if you look at those numbers I was talking, Google was about 4 years old. Facebook hadn't been invented, YouTube hadn't been invented, and they've really gone for, and to be honest, even reliable Wi-Fi was quite difficult to find. Incredibly worth having a look at some of the work that they've done in the past. Carol mentioned some area around, they were some of the first people to look at getting ebooks published, learners to create their own ebooks, and some great stuff there that's really well worth having a look at. And also some people that are incredibly willing to learn the fact what went wrong. They believe a lot of what device manufacturers told them when things would be ready and whether they'd work with their systems, and to be honest, they'll tell you the warts and all story. What's interesting about that is that was primary, and they've also done some work with those schools going across transition. So that's going from primary into secondary. In the UK, that's leaving primary at about 10 or 11 and then moving into secondary. This is something I tweeted, I think, about, and certainly have mentioned within the MobiMOOC, is this is a project that's not specifically mobile, but I said I would give it a real plug, because if any of you are thinking about doing mobile projects with primary and secondary school age children, this is the idea of looking at using young people as digital mentors themselves, and this was set up involving the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust in the UK, and I think Toshiba were the technology partner. And it looks at the idea of giving young people a role at helping both teachers and their peers in using technology in the classroom or outside the classroom. I think there could be some real potential here for using it within the mobile space, because one of the things that we always get told is the fact that two lies we get told. One is that all children are digitally comfortable. They're not. And the other thing to say is that staff can very quickly learn how to use technology, or they won't use technology at all. I think the thing with the Digital Leaders project, which is well worth having a look at, is in fact it's about empowering young people to work with teachers and other support staff about how to use technology effectively. There's a basic summary page really, and I've just covered that really. But I think what's interesting about it, it's gone from something that's been quite small scale to being quite important in some schools, and some people, I'm going to give you some Twitter names of people later who have been very heavily involved in that sort of project. Now, our colleagues that are here from Australia, is anybody involved with Slide to Learn in Australia? Because I've got a bit of a okay. That's interesting, Malcolm. Thanks for that. I'm trying to arrange with a lady called Louise Duncan to take over the Illuminate slot. I think it's going to be on Thursday for a short session on what's happening with Slide to Learn in Australia, and I think it might be a good one for her to talk to people about really. It started in a range of schools, I believe, in Victoria. If you're an iPad user or an iPod user, there's a great link there at slidetolearn.info. Actually, produced a iBooks readable PDF version of how they think to get started with e-learning, and there's a very, very active Ning community there, and they just had about less than a month ago quite a large conference, of which might be worth trying to pick up on, Malcolm, if you can see, and I'll put Louise's name up on certainly on Twitter, and the link to more information if that would be helpful to people. They've done some, and what's interesting about Louise is going to speak is she's got some real interesting issues about whether we give learners directly connected devices. So whether we get a device, we start using devices that are phones as well as Wi-Fi, because she will tell you very honestly that she's got some real problems with kids disrupting classes by texting within classes. And she'll be quite honest about that, and she's quite interested to hear talk on that matter, because we all get used to us all saying, oh, it'll all be sorted, and it's a cultural problem, and you know, we can all overcome it. But sometimes she's got some real quite powerful stories there. Yeah, Malcolm, thank you for that. I saw you put up the link to the flexible learning. I hadn't come across that, and that's really interesting actually. Really interesting. Thanks for that, Malcolm. I'm on one of the things that I'm going to be around on Google most of this week. But one of the things I'm speaking at a face-to-face event in London later this week on SMS in schools. I'm very fond of SMS as a technology, mainly because it's simple. It's one of those things where it's worth talking about cultural differences about SMS with contacting school, talking to parents or talking to young teens or those sort of things about cultural differences. For example, in the UK, we have a culture in most of our mobile communication where SMS is almost effectively free. For about £5 or £6, that's what 12 Australian dollars a month, you can get a mobile phone which will give you a small number of voice minutes, but will give you probably unlimited text. And if you look at the number of texts being sent in the UK by young people, it's just phenomenal. Globally, you've got to remember there were 6.1 trillion texts sent last year. I'll just type that in. That's 6.1 trillion. If you don't understand trillions, neither do I. That's 200,000 a second across the globe. We're starting to see SMS being used in a lot of UK schools, not all UK schools, and we've got an issue about whether schools allow phones into school, but there's been used a lot in communication between schools to parents and where appropriate to learners. Interestingly, a lot of it's viewed as parental control stuff. You'll get a text saying your child hasn't turned up for school or your child is ill. But also we've seen a lot of positive things, like, for example, schools informing parents about parents' evenings. And it's quite interesting when you've got parents that are sharing parenting because of family breakdown, that you get situations where both parents will receive a message about a parents' evening rather than getting lost in the black hole of the school bag, as I call it, the paper pieces being lost and not getting back to one or other of the parents. I've had a bit of experience in the past also I'm very interested in SMS with the deaf. It's the first technology with deaf learners that they've been on an even playing field with hearing teen learners especially. And there's some really interesting things of modifying your timetabling system. So if you make a timetabling change, not only do you tell your learners, but you text your learners. So it can remind deaf students don't hear you particularly well, or students are particularly forgetful. The fact is it will come to their phone, it will remind them, and that's really nice. We've been very lucky in the UK that obviously we have a relatively benign climate, unlike poor people in Australia and obviously people in Christchurch, New Zealand, recently with and Japan with the earthquake. We've had to see a lot of evidence of both Twitter and SMS being used to let people know about whether schools are closed due to snow or bad weather. In the States, especially in vocational education, higher education, it's used for much more worrying purposes around on-site campus incidents and things like that. That's been a big issue. And in fact, in parts of the States, I think it's becoming almost you've got to have a system that will allow you to do fire and release, pardon the pun, SMS message or bulk email messages to learners very quickly. It's some issue there. If you haven't seen the area, one of our participants, Jenny, and I'm trying to remember, Jenny Hume, I think is on the MobiMOOC of ex-CLC in Birmingham. She's done a lot of work with deaf learners in I think it's South Birmingham, primarily using sign language and PSPs, but we'll come back to that. Mobile phones, and Carol will smile at me, are a bit of a political issue in UK schools at the moment for some people, but I'm just going to talk about some very simple work that's being done by using them as countdown timers. So you use them for experiments and using them as stopwatches. There's videos for experiments, still pictures of art, those sort of things. For example, here's an example from me, just me personally. I quite often use my camera phone to either take the things that I need to remember or things I'd like to remember. I'll take photographs of where my car is parked in a car park, so I remember which floor it's on, or I will take things of posters I like or views I like, or that kind of stuff. We did some work with Elizabeth Hartley-Young, who was at Nottingham University, but now, as I believe involved in Victoria and Australia's education department. She did some work looking at the use of mobile phones in secondary, and some really nice examples there are worth picking up on, really. she did about 10 or 11 things, only which one involved connectivity. So it's not talking about kids cruising the net on their mobiles, it's actually just using the innate thing that they have, the ability to record, the ability to take pictures, sound files, those sort of things, and use it for that. And I put a QR code link to that one as well. Yeah, it's interesting. Carol just brought up the idea of QR codes. I'm a bit snobby about QR codes. They've been around for years, and it's all of a sudden they've just gone mad in the UK, which is great. But they have been around. I mean, if you talk to colleagues in Japan, they've been using QR codes for 10 years in Japan, primarily in marketing.